Stone from Plus61J. It's been a very difficult week for all of us, and there's a great hunger for information and connection. So I'm very pleased that we're able to offer tonight the insights of some of our writers. Before we start, I want to make two kinds of acknowledgement. The first is our usual acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the Indigenous people, the traditional owners of the land on which we are, wherever we are on Zoom. For me, that's the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nations. And we pay our respects to elders past and present at a time when it's been very difficult on so many levels this week. I think it's very important to acknowledge for those of us who are in Australia, the fortune we have to be here on this land. I also want to acknowledge, as we move into a conversation that is going to be emotional and difficult, that what has happened this week in Israel is an enormously traumatic, emotional event. And as we move into talking about context and strategy, we inevitably will, I want to just acknowledge how difficult this is for everybody and how personal it is and how it has affected everybody in different ways. And that includes many people in the Jewish community in Australia who have friends and relatives who are deeply affected, as well as all of our panelists who are in Israel. And that brings me to introducing our panelists, whom you will know as correspondents for Plus61J Media, all based in Jerusalem and all of great value to us as people who bring their insights about life in Israel. Eetta Prince-Gibson is a very experienced journalist. She was previously editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Report. She's the Israel editor of The Moment magazine, and she's a regular contributor to a number of Israeli publications. Elhanan Miller is a rabbi, a writer, journalist. He's also a fluent Arabic speaker, which brings particular insight. He teaches Arabic and Jewish studies at the Hartman Institute and at Pardes. And some of you may have heard him recently in Australia, where he spoke at Plus61J events in Sydney and Canberra. Ittay Flescher needs no introduction to Australian audiences. If you're not either Australian or Israeli, you may not have heard of Ittay, but otherwise you'll already know him. He taught in Melbourne Jewish schools for 15 years, and he now lives in Israel, where in addition to journalism, he's education director of Kids for Peace. I'm going to begin by asking our panelists a few questions, but we very much want to hear from you and get your questions. So please go into the chat, write your questions, and read the questions that are there and vote up those you would like to see answered. There's an opportunity to push answers to the top of the chat. So please participate. This is an opportunity for you to ask people who really know what's going on. So let's begin. Before we get into the, I guess, political, strategic questions, I would like to get each of you to just give me a story, an anecdote, a moment that captures this week for you. Maybe Ittay, start us off.
So good evening, everyone. If I had to describe this week in one word, the word I would use is shiva. A shiva is usually something you sit with your own family on low chairs, eating lots of cake, and you approach people and you're not meant to ask, how are you? Because everyone knows how you're feeling. So the hardest question this week in the street, whenever I speak, is if someone asks, how are you? I say, don't ask that question. You know, we're sitting shiva. And not only I feel is all of Israel sitting shiva, maybe all of the Jewish people are sitting Shiva. And I don't know if that's ever happened, at least in my lifetime before, that there's been an event that's led to an entire religion sitting Shiva at the same time. And just to share, I've got so many anecdotes of the past week, but just one. So on Friday night, I went to shul at Kohen Shamat, the Reform shul in my neighborhood. And I don't usually go to shul on Friday nights often, but usually just the Chagim. But I felt I needed to be with community on Friday night, and the rabbi there, Oded, he started leading Yedid Nefesh, the first psalm of Kabbalat Shabbat, and he reached the line Ana El Na Refan Allah, which is asking God to heal all the wounded. And as he's leading Kabbalat Shabbat, he just bursts out in tears, and many people in the Kehillah start crying during Kabbalat Shabbat. And I look around and I see all the tears around me. And then I also notice that there's no one in the room aged 20 to 40. So we're sitting Shiva, and we're also missing this huge amount of the population who are all in the reserves. And that's my feeling this week, Shiva.
Thanks, Ittay. Eetta.
Relate to 2 points. One is that a very good friend of mine is captive or presumed captive in Gaza. And so a lot of my time is also writing about her, but we're all touching base with each other, those of us and she's a peace activist. The other thing that I think was the kind of continuing, Ittay, what you were saying, this theme, attending a funeral and having never heard before the loudspeakers say, will the mourners please move on because another family is waiting? And I'd never heard that before. And I guess it just said how many funerals I read in one of the publications today. There were about 100 scheduled for today.
Thank you, Eetta. Elhanan?
Yeah, I really resonate with everything Ittay said. The synagogue that I go to as well this Shabbat was much fuller than it usually is. I guess one anecdote that I can think of is that I've been giving sort of nonstop interviews on Arab media, which I do regularly, but at times of war like this, it just explodes. I probably have given 20 to 30 interviews on all the Arabic speaking channels in Europe that call me, be it Britain, France, Germany, which I guess psychologically in one way helps sort of keep the mind off the enormity of everything that's happening here and focused on a certain mission. Because when you just stop, things start sinking in, and it's very difficult. In some of these interviews, a person would be interviewed before me from Gaza, and someone I know, you could almost call him a colleague or a contact of mine, that I used to use in journalism when I was covering Gaza. And at some point, I just sent him a voice message on WhatsApp asking how he was, as Israel has been demanding people in Gaza to move south. And after about a silence of a day or two, he wrote back to me saying that he moved south to family that he has in the southern Gaza Strip, and he's all right. And we wished each other well and peace and security. So behind all of this enormity and terror and fear, there are still human beings that are in contact with each other, and there's a humanity underneath that is still trying to sort of raise its head and exist within all of this.
Well, that I think is a good segue to a question that Alex Katz has asked to Ittay and Elhanan. Both of you work in interfaith dialogue, and we haven't been able to engage with the Muslim community here. Have you been able to? What do you see as the future for such continuing dialogues? Elhanan, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to think about long-term future goals. Obviously, this puts into question so much of the work we do. But the goal of my project that I was talking about in Australia a couple of weeks ago, in Sydney, People of the Book, is to humanize each other, is to humanize Muslims and Jews. And if anything, I think that this war has just shown us the dire need of humanization more and more. We know it can't reach everywhere, and that there's a huge battle against dehumanization that's ongoing. I've used my channel to convey one main message so far, which is trying to secure the release of a colleague's son, Hirsch Goldberg Polin, who was injured in the attack and is in captivity in Gaza, as far as we know. And I used religious language there. I used a hadith, a story that talks about how the Prophet Muhammad visited a Jewish neighbor of his who was hostile to him and nevertheless overcame the hostility and was kind to him. So I tried to use that, and I've been sort of sharing verses here and there about humanity and even at times of war. And I'm constantly thinking about, in between sort of news interviews where I'm asked about, the incursion and what's happening, trying to think how I can use my channel, which has over 300,000 followers right now, to convey messages that could be constructive and that could humanize. I haven't had much time to give that, but it's definitely something I'm thinking about. And even at times of war, I think religion and dialogue have room.
Ittay?
Look, this is really hard because I've worked in peace building now for 5 years, and I read Liel's article in Plus61J this week about all the Palestinians that reached out to him, and for me as well, Palestinian friends reached out to me as well, and I obviously have reached out to them about their loved ones in Gaza. But I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There are also Palestinians who are celebrating this. There are also Palestinians who feel like, Gazans were kept in a cage for 17 years. Did you think that they would never try and break free? And that I've had some difficult conversations with friends saying, I understand that people in Gaza want to break free, but not like this, not to kill women and children and babies. Like, Palestinian people deserve freedom, but and then you've got people like Vera Awad, who she represented Israel in Eurovision with Elhanan Miller. She had a very powerful post about solidarity, saying barbarians have taken over the Palestinian cause, and this isn't. I want a homeland, but I don't want it like this. To me, it sort of reminded me a little bit of Jewish responses to Dir Yassin before 1948, and I think in terms of our organization, it's very hard because we deal with children, and children spend a lot of time on social media. And anyone that's been on social media knows that Israel-Palestine is always pretty brutal on social media, but it's 100 times worse this week. And I know my kids are seeing very one-sided posts on one side or the other that are very graphic, that obviously demonize. And I still believe in peace. I still, like Elhanan said, I think the only way that we can ever share this land together is to humanize one another. And I've always been in minority holding that view, but I think in the same way that Oslo, destroyed a lot of the Israeli left, I think this could be the final nail in the coffin. Like, I don't think anyone is in the mood to humanize anyone at the moment, because after the brutality and horror of Hamas, and I'm loath to use Nazi analogies. I never really compare anyone to Nazis except Nazis, because I really don't like that language. But you can't not look at the images of Saturday and think of pogroms and the Holocaust. Like, it's so, and I know that's not all Palestinians, and I know that shouldn't be what the Palestinian cause is associated with, but it is for many Israelis, and it is for many people around the world now. And so how do you move forward from that? And how do you move forward from what Israel is doing in Gaza now as well? These will take years, generations to rebuild these bridges. And I don't know if anyone wants to do that anymore. So yeah, if I'm being honest, I feel pessimistic about peace building as much as I still believe in it, and I feel like we failed as well. We were, all these organizations were, we were trying to prevent this. We were trying to, Vivian Silva, I don't know if you've heard of her. She was from Women Wage Peace. She was on the board of B'Tselem. She's kidnapped in Gaza at the moment. And sometimes I think of Vivian a lot. I think after all the years of dialogue she's done, what dialogue is happening to her now in Hamas captivity? What's she saying to the people around her? What cruelty are they inflicting on her? It's just heartbreaking. So, I believe in peace building, but I also feel like peace building has failed. So I don't know if that's an answer, but that's honestly how I feel at the moment.
Elhanan, you read some of the Arabic media. What are you coming across there? Is there a sense that everybody in the Palestinian world is supportive of what has happened in the past week?
I haven't seen any outright criticism. I haven't followed it very closely, but I haven't seen outright criticism of the morality of what took place in op-eds or things like that. What has surprised me, though, to some extent, is how susceptible Hamas leadership is to claims of human rights violations. And I've seen this again and again from what we used to call the political leadership of Hamas, people like Musa Abu Marzouk, Khalid Mashal, and others have come out and said, first of all, they lie and they deny that atrocities have been committed. But that lie is just sort of, I think, proof of a realization of how damaging the images that are coming out, many of which were taken by Hamas people themselves, were captured by the attackers themselves, how damaging this is to their cause, and how important the media landscape is in this battle, probably more so than ever before. We see how this is primarily a media and a psychological sort of battle over narrative. And just today I saw Khalid Mashal, the political leader of Hamas, for the first time say mistakes have been committed during this war. This is in Al Risala. This is a Hamas website. He hasn't specified what mistakes, but then he outright denied that any orders were given to attack civilians, which is blatantly and patently untrue, as we know. But I think it shows to some extent the distress that Hamas is, at least in terms of media. Unfortunately, and I've said this in an interview just today, you don't see the kind of self-criticism on the Palestinian side from the morality or the political side of what's happened that you do in Israel. In Israel, there's this sort of uproar and rage, of course, against Hamas, but also against the government of Israel and the security establishment that has allowed this to happen. And I don't see a parallel, not even close to a parallel uproar on the Palestinian side. Even on the side that's opposed to Hamas, Fatah, which you would expect might come out and say this, you don't really see that, unfortunately, right now.
So on that question of media, Abigail Lithwick has sent in a question about, we're currently seeing on the internet a great deal of misinformation and propaganda. How can we engage thoughtfully and safely with these platforms? Etta, do you want to start with that?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing is that we should all take a deep breath before we use social media, because social media just encourages extremism. It's so easy to sit in our, in our rooms and type away things that we might not say person to person. So the first thing is take a deep breath before you write. I can speak for mainstream media that I'm working with here, Time Magazine, Foreign Policy, a couple of others, and we're trying very hard, and as an Israeli, it's even more complicated, but to give correct media. However, social media is a problem. I'm not sure it's the best source of information. I'm sure it's not. the best source of information at all. I know how hard we've worked on Plus61J in terms of, vetting and thinking, and is this what we want to say? And the journalist writes, and you, the editor sitting in Australia, come back at us and say, is this clear? Is this what you wish to say? And I think that's the process. It's not, though, going to answer the need for immediate. People want an answer now. I don't have an answer now. I have a story now. I have a feeling now. I have a thought, but I don't have an answer right now. And I think the most important thing to do is hold on to the complexity right now, the sadness, the anger, the rage, the hope, if there is such a thing. And that's what the media can do. But know that what you're seeing on social media is probably not very accurate on either side. The other thing I would do is encourage everybody to read things they don't agree with. Not what you feel like doing in this kind of a situation. I want to only read things that make me feel better, if that's possible. I want to hear only people who think like I do. And I think that's quite natural. Force yourselves to listen to a different opinion. If only to make sure that you know why you're thinking what you're thinking or feeling what you're feeling, if only to challenge yourself. And I know how, believe me, I'm not trying to preach or, it's not easy and it's sad. And I think that when you're not here, that's probably, in terms of the media, one of the most important things you can do. We're going to need the support of people who are not as bruised as we are real soon.
There's a question here which has got a lot of people wanting it answered, and I must say I want it answered too, which is, why is Egypt refusing to open humanitarian corridors and allow Palestinians to leave or aid to be delivered? Who wants to have a go at that? Go on, Ittay.
There's a saying in the Middle East, there's nothing more permanent than a temporary solution. If you open the borders to Egypt and you set up a huge Palestinian refugee camp in El Arish, and Israel says it's just for a month and they're all going to come back, it's not for a month, and I think Egypt knows that opening up the borders for humanitarian assistance means that hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Palestinians will permanently be in Egypt. Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, the Egyptian president, does not like the Muslim Brotherhood, which is, Hamas is connected to. So I can understand why Egypt doesn't want those people. I can understand why, for very obvious reasons, Israel doesn't want to open a humanitarian corridor into Israel. So I understand why that's not happening, but it creates a huge, huge ethical problem to Israel's military operation when Israel's telling people to leave with nowhere to go. But maybe Elhanan, you've got more thoughts on that. But
yeah, I mean, I've been asked that as well by people overseas. I think Ittay is being a little bit polite and maybe judicious towards the Egyptians. I think, yeah, the main reason is that that he has very little mercy for Palestinian Gazan lives. Egypt, as a country, never was interested in any involvement in the Gaza Strip. Historically, when Egypt took control of Gaza between 48 and 67, it never annexed Gaza the way Jordan annexed the West Bank. It ruled Egypt militarily. And of course, when Israel returned the Sinai to Egypt in the peace accords, Sadat had wanted nothing to do with the Gaza Strip and its millions of Palestinians. And this is way, way before the Muslim Brotherhood had any real role in Gaza. So I think yeah, I think Egypt is wary of Palestinians. I think that its humanitarian concerns for the well-being of Palestinians in Gaza is not on par with, maybe Western standards of what a humanitarian need would be. And yes, I agree with Ittay that this puts a certain ethical burden on Israel. I hope and pray that Egypt at least will be able to allow humanitarian aid to come in through Egypt and through the Rafah crossing into the southern Gaza Strip, which is where Palestinians are moving to. I mean, I also hope Israel will allow humanitarian aid to enter, but I don't have great expectations from the Egyptians to solve the humanitarian crisis on their side, unless Israel confronts them directly about it, which I don't see Israel doing. I don't see Israel demanding Egypt open the Rafah crossing either. So things are a bit up in the air with that.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add, I'm not sure why they should, quote unquote, when nobody's pressuring them to. I mean, the question, I've also been asked that question numerous times in interviews with foreign press, but I haven't seen particular pressure on Egypt from anybody to say you have to do this. So with all the reasons that they don't want to, as Elhanan said, and their history of not wanting to, but I think also the Egyptians would be rightly suspicious about how much help they would get if they opened the border, because while everybody's very aware, so to speak, meeting the rest of the world, of this humanitarian crisis, I can bet that Egypt would then in the end be left alone to deal with it and not find the Western world coming through, certainly not the Arab nations coming through, to help them deal with these hundreds of thousands of people who are going to be coming across the border. And I think it's important that people remember it's always easy for people to say, well, they're all Arabs. There maybe, but there's certainly different nations and different cultures. And Egypt, that would be taking in a very, very large group of people who are foreign to them, that they don't want, that they feel no affinity for, that they have no regard for human rights, much for their own people, and that they'll be left alone to deal with it and not find a lot of support anywhere.
There's a question here that a lot of people are interested in having answered. There have been reports of 1,500 Hamas militants' bodies found in southern Israel. Are these reports correct? Are these deaths part of the untold story of what happened in southern Israel as the IDF secured the south? No, I'm not sure I'm entirely clear on that question, but a lot of people answered.
I'm not sure I understand the question. What I can say is, do we know how many Hamas people actually infiltrated into Israel? Well, over 1,000, but I don't, first of all, I'm not in love with body counts as a measure of assessing something, but I don't think we know that. And I'm not sure what it would indicate. We already know that there was well over 1,000. I don't know how much well over means, who infiltrated into Israel. How many of them escaped? I would assume very few. Where their bodies are, I don't know. And I would not accept any figure right now.
Yeah, I think I'll just add to that I think 1,000 bodies have been verified by the Israeli side, but Hamas itself, Abu Baida, the speaker for the Qassam brigades, when he announced this operation and kind of summarized what it was about, he spoke about 3,000 fighters engaged directly in the operation. I don't know if all of them entered Israel, but that's the number he gave: 3,000 fighters plus 1,500 auxiliary forces that are in sort of the back to help and support those people. So we're talking about a total of 4,500 Hamas operatives involved in one way or another in this operation. And those are the numbers that Hamas is talking about.
So Jackie Goldenberg says here, I'm afraid that at least in the media, the humanitarian disaster in Gaza is going to outweigh the horrific murders last Saturday, and the world is going to forget the terrorist acts. I think we've all got a sense that that is happening and happening remarkably quickly. What can we do? Is there anything we can do to counter that?
I'm going to say what I want my government to do. I don't know what you can do in the diaspora, because I saw Stephen Baroda also ask that question about an end game. So, I watch all the briefings from the various IDF spokespeople. Naftali Bennett is speaking a lot. Israel's minister is actually speaking a bit less, but everyone is saying we should defeat Hamas, we should destroy Hamas, and they're right. Hamas is an existential threat to Zionism, to the Jewish people, to the existence. Israel can't continue to exist with Hamas next door to it. It makes Zionism not viable. It's like having a cancer in your body. You can't it's going to destroy you, because no one is going to keep living here now that we know that Hamas has the ability to do what it did on Simchat Torah. So Hamas has to be destroyed. And its ability to harm us again in the way it did last Shabbat has to be removed. The question is how, and that's what we're discussing now. And in every interview I've seen, I saw one with President Herzog on CNN, and he's asked, what's the end game? You defeat Hamas and then what? Who rules Gaza? Who, a UN force, the Israelis? Are you going to bring in a moderate Arab country, the PLO, Fatah? Like, who is, and there's no answer. And so, I think we all know from history that regime change without a plan is very, very dangerous. And I think one of the best ways for Israel to perhaps increase its, identity, respect around the world is to say, not only are we doing this in Gaza, but this is our end game. At the end of this, we're going to ensure that such and such person will rule Gaza, or we're going to ensure such and such rights for refugees, or we're going to create a Palestinian state. Or there has to be, when you begin an operation, you have to say what victory looks like. At the moment, we're just saying victory looks like defeating Hamas, but we're not saying what happens the day after we defeat Hamas. And I think if the Israeli government could provide an answer to that question, then I think supporters of Israel around the world would have some information to address why all this humanitarian suffering is happening. But without an end game, then it's very hard to justify.
I think that also, as long as the media game, especially within the quote pro-Israel community, is just get them. I saw somebody posted, there are no innocents in Gaza. There are people who supported Hamas, and children who are and parents who are raising their children to be murderers when they grow up. And as long as that's the stand that the Jewish community is projecting, then we're going to leave it open to also very simplistic analysis. Human, that Hamas, there's going to be a tragedy in Gaza, but that's to say only that, as Ittay said, and not to say what is our responsibility, what is for what is the point? And if the only point that some of the quote pro-Israel community is presenting is to get back, to express revenge, then that we're leaving the field open to that, and maybe even deserve it. If what we're saying is we can't live with Hamas, neither can the Palestinians. And I don't mean to be paternalistic or make decisions for them, but Hamas has shown itself to be incompetent, in a horrible, horrible leadership. If we can come up with this statement of where we're going with all of this, that makes the whole, not only the media, but the reality much more complex and much more real and much more I don't want to say worthwhile, but understandable at least.
I want to slightly disagree with my friends here. I think Israel definitely needs a strategic plan for Gaza, but I think that sort of war against terrorists, and especially this is not unprecedented, but it's new that terrorist group has control over a tract of land and a vast number of civilians. We saw this recently with ISIS. Maybe in that sense, the comparison with ISIS is correct, in the sense that you have a terror organization that doesn't abide by human rights law, controlling millions of civilians and fighting from within civilian areas. And that's something that the world needs to start understanding how to deal with more. And Israel, in some sense, is at the forefront of that. I think a war that's being engaged with more tactical purposes than what is the day after plan, to uproot terrorists, to eliminate people who are fighters, to actually search and rescue hostages who are held in the Gaza Strip, to reach rocket launchers and attacks that are still ongoing from within Gaza. I think those goals are justified in and of themselves at the moment. The problem we have is that the government isn't communicating exactly even those goals. So what I think, if the question was kind of tactical, how do we communicate this and justify the hardships that the Palestinians are going through in Gaza? even on that level, there isn't enough communication from the leadership of the army. They aren't saying, our goal right now is to free the hostages and search house to house. Our goal is to eliminate rocket launchers in a way we can't do from the air. Our goal is to cripple Hamas's military abilities, and we can only do this through a land operation. Those are legitimate goals in and of themselves, I think, even before the day after plan, which we definitely need. But even that communication isn't being done properly yet. And I find myself kind of guessing in interviews what I should say about what these goals are, even on the tactical level.
Yeah, well, when the president of the country says, what's the purpose of this? And you realize that he's, as you said, Elhanan, not relating neither to this, he's asking on a strategic, but even on a tactical level, then you realize that the government, I think, again, in this case, I'll say you're being kind, isn't communicating. That implies an assumption that they have one, and they're not telling us. I think it's much less thought out than that. And that worries me even more. I can, even as somebody who mourns the loss of life, can live with that because we're facing evil. And when you face evil, it's a different, the quantum balance there gets a little different. But I have to know why, even on a tactical level. And I think the failure of this government, Deborah, is something I don't know if people are asking about because I haven't seen all the chats, but the failure of this government is certainly something to discuss here, and the extent to which it's failing us on all levels.
Yes, there was a question here, but I'm having trouble keeping up with all the questions, but there was a question here about the current Israeli feeling about the government. And I would also like to get some understanding from you about what you think what effect this is going to have on support for the current government and what's going to happen. Is one result of this emergency cabinet, the emergency government, that we end up with a different Israeli government after this war?
Are you direct? Should I take that?
Yeah, that sounds like one for you, Etta.
Well, I think that the government is doing a terrible disservice. It's non-functional. Civil society has taken over functions that any reasonable government should provide. And when a government abdicates its responsibility to its public, then I think things become very, very different. There had already been a sense by the demonstrators and the protest movement that the government had tried to unilaterally change the rules of the game, and that breaks up any sense of belief in the government. Now you have a much broader sense of the public, and you have open Likud members saying, I voted Likud, but I wouldn't do this again. I voted for Bibi, but I won't. You have the mayor of Sderot saying, I called the prime minister and he didn't call me back. And Sderot is a city that is receiving nonstop barrages of missiles. I think that's going to really shake up the political system. I think we also know that it's not just that the political system is being shaken up, it's that civil society has really stepped up. What we're seeing here in terms of civil society, not only in doing good and practically doing good, but also in organizing, in thinking, is very striking. I think we're going to see perhaps even something hopeful in the future. I think that we're going to be very bruised, very hurt, very angry, probably on both sides. But I think we certainly are going to see a change in leadership. There are those who say this will kill them. To be fair, there are those who say this will entrench the government, because war, you want to you gather around the campfire, or in the American analogy, you draw in the wagons. But I think, and I hope, more are going to say this government has shown that it doesn't care about anything, anybody except itself. And everything's going to be up for grabs. And I hope that we can do that well.
Maybe I'll just add that the Israel before October 7th doesn't exist anymore. So, you know, I just a short anecdote. I subscribe to Haaretz and I get the physical newspaper every Shabbat. Usually it takes me a week to read it because the Shabbat edition is quite big. And so for the past week, I've been reading last week's Haaretz, as I usually do. And literally every article in the newspaper was irrelevant. There was one article about us arguing over a mechitza on Simchat Torah. There was another article about the justice reform. The justice reform is finished. This thing that we argued about for 10 months, it's finished. I saw stories this week of Haredim now want to be drafted to the IDF to support Israel. I saw another story that El Al is flying on Shabbat. Things that would have brought down a coalition in the past are happening without question. Trains ran on Shabbat yesterday. As well, Avigdor Lieberman, the biggest enemy of Haredim, is now in the coalition, sitting with Shas in United Torah Judaism. Nothing in this country is the same as it was before October 7th. I've never once read a newspaper before where literally every article was wrong in its analysis, and I'll admit I was wrong in my analysis too. I didn't see this coming. I didn't expect Hamas would do this. Israel's been giving Hamas, Qatari money and allowing workers. And I think all of us were in this conception, as they say in Hebrew, or concept that this wasn't going to happen, or that Hamas didn't have the ability to do this. And then when it did, we shocked. And, none of us have crystal balls, and so we can't predict the future. But all we can say is that nothing that existed before October 7th is the same. And I'll also say that Simchat Torah will never be a happy day again for our lifetimes. In the same way that Yom Kippur in Israel is always associated with the Yom Kippur War, I think in history, Simchat Torah will become associated with this day for many years to come. And that's also something about the nature of that Jewish festival is always going to be marked with this heavy loss and grief.
That's a terrible thought. A very, very sad thought. Yeah. I want to ask a question which has been asked in a number of forms by the people on the chat. How much support do you think Hamas has in the Palestinian community? And what effect will this have on the West Bank? So two related questions. Elhanan, let's start with you on this one.
Yeah, so I've written in the past that Israel has set up a set of incentives vis-a-vis Hamas that were devastating. So to say that this was completely unexpected, I wouldn't say that. I myself have written about the set of incentives that led to something not maybe of this magnitude. I don't think anybody expected something of this magnitude, but Israel over the past few years has been incentivizing violence and kidnappings, specifically the Netanyahu government, with the Shalit deal, with Israel's unilateral withdrawal from the Gaza Strip as a result of targeted shellings and missiles into Israel, leading Israel to unilaterally withdraw from 100% of the Gaza Strip. So for the things that Palestinians care most about, and it's very painful to say this right now because we're all suffering, but the things that Palestinians care most about, Israel provided them to the Palestinians only in return for violence. That has to be said. I think Hamas overplayed its hand right now. I think it miscalculated what such carnage would lead to on the Israeli side. And I think this will backfire. This will not lead to what a Hamas leader who I interviewed 5 years ago, told me, a more dignified deal than the Shalit deal, when he was talking about Oron Shaul and Hadar Goldin, the two abducted soldiers from years before. But I kind of poo-pooed him. I was thinking, this is ridiculous. How is he talking about a more dignified deal than the Shalit deal when all they have is two bodies of soldiers? Israel won't trade and hadn't traded prisoners for bodies, or even for the two civilians that are being held. And we got that wrong. In other words, in the long game, Hamas has proved that it's willing to go to very, very great lengths for liberating prisoners from their jails. what will this do for the support of Hamas? I think that question is just as complex as the one of the previous question about what will Israel be like after this. True, Israel that we knew is not the same. The political leadership, I think, is going to be gone, but the sentiments that brought up the extreme right and fueled the right-wing government are not gone. They might even be more entrenched now. So even if we see different figures at the helm, the changes of people won't make this a more liberal Israel, a more peace-loving Israel. If anything, I'm afraid the opposite will happen. And with Hamas, I don't know if this is what's going to lead Israel to find a pragmatic peace partner on the Palestinian side who will be able to consolidate authority over both parts of the Palestinian territory and reach a peace agreement with Israel. I wish and pray that that would be the outcome, that there would be someone now in control that would reach a pragmatic deal with Israel. But it's very, very hard to say that at this point.
I would say, Elhanan, that I'm much more on the fence than you. I mean, I think that the scenario of an entrenching of right-wing, very xenophobia and nationalism in Israel is a real possibility. I think the other possibility is a reorganizing and a leadership that can take people in a more, not only more pragmatic, but a more balanced view. And maybe in the end, it just comes down to neither of us know. We can only hope, we don't know. What I would say, though, I don't know in terms of the within Hamas and within the Palestinians. I am encouraged that Jerusalem has remained quiet, more or less, and I'm very encouraged. And I live in a neighborhood that's on the seam of East Jerusalem, Abu Ghul, and we are not feeling in any way threatened. The city's remained quiet. I hope it stays that way. There's some organization happening in Jerusalem already to say how do we come out of this strengthened in terms of sharing the city, and I'm talking about Palestinians as well. I think that when you say incentivized violence by rewarding Hamas, we can't forget what that was about, which was to allow Israel to maintain and extend its control in the West Bank. This, as I said, this was, if we give Hamas whatever it wants, and we will show the world that the real crazies and the real extremists are in the West Bank. And therefore, we can pretend, and I think that's the conception that was also wrong, that Hamas will ultimately be practical. I don't know where that came from. I think Hamas took what we gave it and laughed all the way to the bank, as they say. I think the over investment in the West Bank, political, economic, and everything else in Jewish settlement will come up for question now. Budgeting, if nothing else, budgeting will come up for question now. And it will be fairly obvious to the Israeli public, at least I hope, that the money should no longer go to expanding settlements, at least not in the short term, but it has to go to rebuilding southern Israel and to be building what we call the Otef Gaza, the area around the Gaza Strip. And I think there's a growing awareness that this didn't have to play out as badly as it did, among other things. That, people asking, where was the army? That's pretty easy to answer. A lot of it was in the West Bank as opposed to on the Gaza side. And that was a deliberate calculation, a deliberate miscalculation politically and militarily. And I think that is how all these different factors are going to play out will be a function, I think, of so many different things, as well as leadership. Ittay, I'm so much older than you that I've lived through Yom Kippur and Purim. And in Purim, there was an attack on Palestinians where Baruch Goldstein murdered 29 Palestinians while they were at prayer. The human ability to when you're not that directly affected, to come to different ways. I was in the army in Yom Kippur. I'm dating myself. And lost many, many friends. And my husband fought, and I didn't know him then, but we deal with a lot of that to this day. And yet we can observe also Yom Kippur is a holy day of what it was before 73. I think we're looking at complexity. And I'm hoping next year I can think, yeah, all the horrible things that happened on Simchat Torah. And it's Simchat Torah. And I think that's what we need to be able to do. Can we? I believe we can.
I hope so. I hope so.
Yeah, don't we all?
I want to come back to the humanitarian question, the question of Gaza, because I've got a number of questions around that, and particularly in relation to the kidnappings. Is Israel trying to use the humanitarian question as a bargaining chip in order to get some movement on the kidnapped Israelis? Eetta, you're shaking your head.
No, I think Elhanan answered that. If they'd say that, and Ittay said that if they'd say that, I could at least grapple with that. I have not heard that as an official statement. I have heard, we will get them and all that. But, and I've heard Bibi statements mostly about how we're going to get revenge. I don't know that. I don't know that. I have not heard that.
Yeah, I'll just say, I really want to hope that civilian pressure is not a card for getting that is not the objective, meaning putting pressure on civilians. I really want to hope that there is fighting going on in the northern Gaza Strip, that Israel genuinely wants to eradicate as many Hamas operatives and launching sites as possible, and that the price of that is the displacement, hopefully temporarily, of many, many Palestinians. But again, that has to be communicated very, very clearly by the government. And I believe it's true. I believe in my heart that Israel doesn't see displacement and reoccupation as a goal. And I don't think that that's the case, but our government has to do much, much better in communicating that.
It's interesting because it's tragic. The woman I know, you mentioned her name, a friend of mine, Vivian, and I keep on thinking, if she's in Gaza, which is the best I can think right now, is this what she would want as a peace activist? And or those of us who know her well and are talking to each other saying, not that's not the way to get us free. Not morally. I don't want to. That's not what I want. Is that we're thinking that's what she would say, as though we could speak in her name. But
I think her son actually said exactly that in an interview that I saw. So he's speaking on her name, in her name,
and has more right to than most of us, of course. And is that really where we want to go? I mean, if do we really want to be a people who say no holds barred, everything is valid, we can do anything we need to do because we have the power to do it? Among other things, what that does is make you very dumb and very blunderingly powerful. And I hope that we can be both smarter and more moral than using civilians as bargaining chips, because then we're not a whole lot better, are we?
This question that was asked right at the beginning, but I've left it till towards the end because I think it's such a good question. I think it's one that everyone really would like to know the answer, and that is, how can we help? What is the highest impact contribution that we can make?
Before I answer that question, but I want to say something related to that question. a week ago, we were at each other's throats over a mechitza on Kikar Dizengoff. That same Kikar Dizengoff, the central square in Tel Aviv, is now filled with thousands of people, filled with boxes, collecting food, clothing, deodorants, toiletries to get to soldiers, to get to people of the South. There are lines of 5 hours of people lining up to donate blood. I'm in a WhatsApp group of people that need babysitters for their children, and all the kids are helping, you know, people that have been in Miluim. There's another group of people cleaning out bomb shelters that have had, you know, rubbish in them that need to be cleaned so people can stay in them. The level of volunteering and solidarity I've seen in this country, for a country that, you know, a week ago I would have said is the most divided country in the world, is incredible. I don't feel like I live in the same country as I did before October 7th. My friend in Tel Aviv, Rabbi Joe Wolfson, said, I've lived 100 years in 5 days. If there's one thing I know now, it's this. If we are like this, we are truly undefeatable. So I think I'm not going to start advocating which charity and which organization and which social media to post. I'm sure you're all smart enough to work that out for yourselves. But I think there's something about Jewish people standing in solidarity with each other in their hour of need that I've seen this week that is maybe the only very, very small bright spark that I've seen this week, and it's very moving.
Etta, do you have anything to say about the way people from Chutz La'aretz can help?
I think, first of all, like Ittay, I don't want to give a list. You can look wherever you're most comfortable. Yes, there is a need for money, certainly and there'll be an even greater need.
There is a list on Plus61J, I might say, for people who want to have a look.
You know, you use your sense in using sources, and I'm sure that Deborah, if Plus61J's put it up, then they're vetted. You know, there is a need for money, but I would go beyond that, and I would say we need a couple of things also. One is stay informed. This is not going to be over tomorrow. This is not, the repercussions are certainly not going to be over in the short while. Please stay informed and please stay involved. And when things get more complicated, which they will, politically, then we'll really need you to be informed, to be well aware, to support Israel as it rebuilds, possibly to support the Palestinians as they rebuild. And I'm saying Palestinians and not Hamas. Let's keep that separate too. Let's keep the complexities. Just hold on to information and complexity, because this is an interest, because this is for the long haul.
Elhanan, do you want to add anything there?
No, I mean, I think Ittay and Eetta expressed my sentiments very, very well. I guess as a rabbi now, in my hat, not as a journalist, but as a rabbi, I would like to see an emotional connection, I guess, with what's happening here, that is based on Jewish values. And I really hope there's a lot of infrastructure in Australia now. And my friends in Australia are engaged in Jewish projects. So I think the best contribution from Jews in Australia is to actually strengthen their Jewish sensibilities, their Jewish commitment in Australia. And that will, I think, have direct repercussions on our force and our fortitude here in Israel. Is if Australian Jewry is strong in its Judaism, I think it'll help us here in Israel as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Elhanan.
I want to apologize to all those people who've asked great questions that we haven't had time to answer. I had a fear that this would happen. There are a lot of really good questions here, and we will try over the next few weeks to maybe answer them in various ways on the website. I think that you've given me a whole lot of ideas for ways that we can approach this as if we were short of stories, which I assure you we are not. But we did say we would keep this to an hour, and so we are going to. I want to thank our three panelists who are both really well informed and really thoughtful people, and also people who are living through this daily. I was warned before this started that there was a chance that there could be a siren and we would lose our panel completely. And I'm glad that didn't happen, but I think the fact that they're living with it all the time is just an indication of the reality of how difficult this is. I also want to thank Sharon Berger, who is our events person and organised this at very short notice, and the huge number of you who have come online is an indication of how worthwhile her work is. And Dash Lawrence, who is our CEO and who organises everything so incredibly well and has been in the background doing all sorts of useful things like sending people links and assuring you that we will get the recording of this around to other people. So thank you, everybody. My apologies, we couldn't do more, but we've done as much as we can with the hour we have, and we just pray for peace soon.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of you. Thank you for supporting us and being there for us, and thank you for your interest and caring.